Performance managers, welcome to Flexible Budgets and Control. This is a teaching video of the latest performance management series. This video will talk about the operational performance cycle and not so much about planning, but about the actual performance and the assessment of the performance with the key objective in mind to address variances in order to finally achieve the originally intended outcomes. The learning objectives for this module are as follows. First, understand this step from planning to controlling, the step from plan to control. Second, comprehend the logic of variance analysis. And third, apply the logic of flexible budgeting to further elaborate variance analysis. And fourth, understand behavioral aspects of budgetary control. Clausewitz said that no plan survives the first contact with the enemy, and the same is true for the budget. The budget usually does not survive the first contact with the real encounter of the year. So we prepare budgets, but once we start collecting information of actual performance, we'll find out that the reality doesn't look like our plan. So we have to respond to variances from planned performance and take corrective measures. We have to start being creative in order to finally achieve our initially set goals. No plan survives the first contact with the enemy, and no budget survives the first day of the new period. This is not so new, but what is the point here? We have to cope with the variances at hand. That means our processes do not develop as planned. We have different sales to be booked than originally expected. We have new costs, and we have maybe new and unexpected challenges to deal with. At the end of the day, we will see variances to our plan. And variances can be favorable or unfavorable. Of course, the unfavorable variances is what we first look at because they hurt more. Unfavorable variances lead to a decrease in operating income relative to the budgeted performance. For example, a reduction in sales, the reduction of the prices for our final products, or an increase in the prices of the products we have to buy in order to produce our products. And yes, there are also the favorable variances. Favorable variances, they don't hurt. The opposite is true. They are good for us. For example, our customers are very happy with our products. They want more and more and more, and they're even willing to pay higher prices for it. That's wonderful, and it can happen. Maybe we even get some of the resources and materials that we wanted to buy cheaper than we expected, or we get higher quality of the materials we expected for the same price. Favorable variances increase the operating income relative to the budgeted performance. So the challenge at hand is to see what has happened, what are favorable and unfavorable variances, and where are action points where we can change the course of the year and where we can increase the performance throughout the year. And it's also important to see that for some variances, we can hold somebody accountable, and some variances just are out of our control. And yes, we can see and measure them, but in some cases, there's nobody to make responsible for it. Let's start with the static budget variance analysis. This is the thing that we probably would do. We have a plan which is called the static budget, where we had an output level of 1.5 million, and we have actual numbers. So actually we had an output, let's say production output of units of 1.6 million. It's a static budget variance of 100,000. And is it favorable or unfavorable? Basically, this is good and favorable. The sales budget somehow is not so favorable. Although we produced more output, our sales revenues went slightly down. So we have a static budget variance of 10,000, but this is unfavorable. Our variable costs increased dramatically. This is unfavorable. And even our fixed costs changed favorably, but they changed. So overall, the final effect of our operating income is 300,000. So yes, this is a very first analysis. We saw overall the operating income is down, so the unfavorable variances were winning this game, and they brought down the performance. However, overall, this assessment is quite unsatisfactory because we don't know what to do. And from this point, we have to dig deeper to get a better understanding and a handle of the situation. In order to get a handle, we have to change our original budget. And we create the flexible budget, which flexes or changes to the level of activity, to the actual level of activity. So let's say we had our static budget of 1.5 million output, and we assume a flexible budget, which is we do as if we originally had planned for 1.6 million, and we assume that all the processes and all our decisions would have been based on 1.6 million. So if we do that, our flexible budget would show us sales revenue at that point of 2.4 million. You see, that shows the drastic difference between the actual and the flexible budget. So something went wrong with the sales price. For the variable costs, we have the same. The variable costs are, of course, proportionate to the output level. And here we see that our flexible budget of variable cost stayed well below our actual numbers. That means something went wrong here as well. The only good news is that our fixed cost, which should have stayed the same, went down. So if everything went according to plan based on the assumption of 1.6 million output, we should have ended up with 750,000 euros of operating income. The difference to the actual is a flexible budget variance. So here is a starting point of understanding what went wrong and how to fix it. Some of you might prefer the graphical illustration of this cost development and the flexible budget. So let's assume a classical cost curve for production. This is a linear function where we have a certain fixed cost level and based on each level of production, a certain amount of costs that will be accumulated. So static budget would mean at a certain level of activity, we have a certain number of costs. And when we see finally that we have at a different level of activity, actual cost, we also see that there's a variance from the ideal path, which is blue line here. So the blue line would have predicted the optimal cost situation for each activity, and we see there's a difference. And here comes into play the flexible budget. The flexible budget would move along the blue line. And based on the activity level, the actual activity level of 8, we can see that the ideal cost would be, or the flexible budget for the activity level of 8 would be a certain amount. There is a difference just because we increase the level of activity. This is the so-called volume variance. Quite naturally, if we build more products, we need more materials to do that. We need more energy, more direct labor, and so on and so on. So this is a volume variance. Of course, you might say if we have to buy more material in short term, this might cause some problems and we have to pay or accept to pay higher prices. But what is more interesting is the flexible budget variance. Here we talk about the differences in processes, the differences in what really happened. And here we can also find the sources of variances, the forces for cost overflows. Here we can get the right markers for looking more deeply into particular processes. In the following table, we can also spread this problem and show the difference between actual and static budget, but this time we build in between the flexible budget, and we see that there's a difference between the actual and the flexible budget, which is the flexible budget variance, which is the variance in production processes. That means the conditions of building, of purchasing have changed. And we see the sales volume variance, which is the difference between the flexible budget, that means the production processes based on the originally planned conditions, and the static budget, which is entirely due to the change in output. So if we go here and go through line by line, we can repeat what we've already found out, that there is a flexible budget variance of 375,000, and we can also see that sales revenues were lower than expected, and although that the variable costs were lower than expected, we overall had operating income variance of minus 375,000, which is the flexible budget variance. And the sales volume variance is 75,000. So far, so good. We have now these two numbers, and the static budget variance can be subdivided into the sales volume variance and the flexible budget variance. If we want to put this into something that I call a very basic conceptual model, we can see that the static budget variance can be subdivided into the flexible budget variance and the sales volume variance. And the flexible budget can be subdivided into price variance and an efficiency variance. And here we have to deep dive into every line of our income statement. We have to look into materials bought, we have to look into production processes, and so on and so on. So if we want to apply this lens to particular problematic processes, this is fine, we can do that. And we can apply this lens, but it comes at a certain cost, to all the different areas of our business. So let's put it this way. We have these two variances, the price variance and the efficiency variance. The price variance can be computed as follows. We take the actual quantity times the difference of the actual price minus the budgeted price. So that means we have a change in price, and this price will be applied to all the quantities that we bought or used in a certain area. And second, we have the efficiency variances, where we take the budgeted price, the original price that we originally planned for, and multiply it with the change in quantity for a particular situation, which means the actual quantity minus the standard quantity. So you might take this lens of analysis to our cost situation. Here, particularly interesting is the situation of direct materials and direct labor. So the flexible budget for direct materials and direct labor show that we have a favorable flexible budget variance for direct materials, and for direct labor an unfavorable flexible budget variance. That means we have to assume from this that maybe we had the opportunity to buy material at a much cheaper price. Maybe we had some bulk discounts, but we substantially had problems to deal with the slight increase in production through higher costs for direct labor. Maybe we had to hire additional labor or had to go into shift work, which is of course more expensive. So if we just take the cost situation on direct materials and direct labor, we see there's a flexible budget variance of 203,332. Let's have a look what is happening there. Before we go into the direct case study, let's recapitulate what is price variance and what is the efficiency variance. And here's a graphical display. So originally we have a difference between the standard quantity and the standard price. We can also use, instead of standard, the budgeted quantity and the budgeted price. The standard refers more to the original plan, right? There are also people refer to the plan cost as the standard cost or the standard conditions of the plan. So they can be used interchangeably. So you see here are times or quantity times price makes a difference in euro or dollar terms. So we have to have a look. We see the difference, right? But the question is, what is can be attributed to what kind of area? Somebody might be responsible for the price. For example, we are not able to pay the right amount of money because we bought too late, or so we didn't buy a huge quantity at the same time, or we didn't buy at a bulk discount, or we didn't negotiate well. This is all possible. Or we have a problem in the production process. That means waste, problems of quality, and so on and so on. So we want to see what is the problem. In this case, we have to, on any case actually, we have to go line by line. So in this case, let's assume that this is just direct material. The price variance is taking care of all the difference in price times the actual quantity. Yes, this is maybe a bit too much actually, because some of the price variance might be due to the change in quantity as well. But this is the assumption because we want to make sure that the efficiency variance can be very clearly addressed. And we originally start with the standard price or the budgeted price and see what's the difference in quantities used. So with this kind of information, we can go to a team lead and ask, hey, why have you used more material per unit than foreseen? So what's the problem here? So the core of the variance analysis is the efficiency variance. Here we can see that there variances in the conditions of the processes. That means the production processes did not go as planned. And the quantity variance, the efficiency variance, will lead us where to look and ask awkward questions maybe. But here, before we rush to conclusions, we should also have a look at the full picture. So the variance analysis will lead us to asking good questions, but it should not lead us to rushing to the wrong conclusions, which might eventually have negative motivational effects. So let's take the case of Syneon, and we continue just with the effect that our output level went up 100,000, that we had direct materials used, and instead of the static budget of 150,000, we used 80,000. We don't know why that happened, but we used definitely less copper than planned. The copper used per output was actually half, which means 0.05 kilogram per unit. There's a problem with the price per copper. The actual is 4.9 euro per kilogram, and the static budget was 4.75. So there's a problem. And we also look at the labor hour, and the labor hour per input has dramatically increased. It's threefold the original plan, and therefore the total labor hours also have almost tripled. On top of that, we see that the rate per labor hour also increased by 10%. So let's have a look for first direct materials and then direct labor. So direct materials. We see that there's an unfavorable price variance. We see that the actual input times the budgeted price shows that there's an unfavorable price variance, and the actual cost went up with that. But that there's a huge efficiency variance, and that we used substantially less money than we expected. That's due to the efficiency variance, and the 380,000 can be attributed to different material. So we can now ask, what is the problem? We can see that there is a problem in the price, but maybe if we go deeper, we might see, we bought slightly different material at a slightly higher price, but it turned out to be much more efficient in the production process, and therefore overall we had a flexible budget difference that is a flexible budget variance that is positive. As far as the direct labor variance is concerned, we have actually nothing good to report. We see that there's a price variance. We paid more. The actual input times the budgeted price, which said we had 72,545 euros just additionally because the price per labor increased. And on top of that, we have the problem that there's efficiency variance that is unfavorable. So what is the problem here? We don't know. But let's assume that we had to hire new people, and it was very difficult to get them at the current market situation. We had to hire them, and on top of that, we had to train them, and all of that cost money and time. So we had problems with on the labor side. We might say, hey, a critical process for as a learning might be HR, and there might be a necessity to increase more flexibility into our HR and direct labor planning process. So here we're already at the limits of budgetary control. It's possible with variance analysis to identify the areas where we have to deep dive into some problems. But it's not possible to identify what is the real problem, because we are looking only from a cost accounting perspective. And we have to get back to the number, process, and people perspective. So if there's a huge problem and a huge variance analysis, it might be worth going there and asking the right questions. So 3 other top problems are here. So first of all, it's one-dimensional. Budgetary control works with euro terms or dollar terms, and it's a monetary planning and control system. So we need more information to have meaningful data. Second, there are important performance measures that are sidelined. For example, quality measures, learning measures, measures that take into account the sentiment of our employees or of our customers. So it's one-dimensional. It's a good starting point, but it's one-dimensional. Second, we have a top-down approach. Budgets are usually top-down approaches. You might say that there's a bottom-up element to it. Yes, but at the end of the day, there must be targets that everyone agrees on, or that at least the top management agrees on. And the motivational repercussions of targets are complicated, especially if there is a clear link to bonus payments. There might even be negative aspects to it if the motivational set objectives are too low. People will stop working because they've already overachieved their targets and received their maximum bonus. And this will destroy entrepreneurial thinking, right? This is the opposite of the idea of budgetary control. We want to understand what goes wrong and fix it. But of course, if the budgetary control means that there is no problem because we are already in line and we just limiting our entrepreneurial spirits, then this is also not good, because meeting the budget or exceeding the budget might not be enough in certain situations when the market is just going through the roof. And third, there's a manufacturing bias. The manufacturing bias is, for historical reasons, still very prominent. We can see it in the production overhead planning and control. This is completely nonsensical in service companies. And unfortunately or fortunately, most of the companies nowadays are service-oriented and no longer manufacturing-oriented. So out of that we can deduct also differences in approaches and new tools to address the topic. First of all, the balanced scorecard that we'll probably talk about. The balanced scorecard is a multidimensional instrument to measure and to manage performance. Another tool would be activity-based costing. Activity-based costing can be implemented as a performance measurement and management tool also in areas where we don't have production. Services can be managed. We can measure and manage activities wherever there are activities. So it can be widely applied. And then there's something that people called beyond budgeting in the late 90s of the last century, and that is called agility in the 21st century, or new work, where this means a complete going away from the budget, because the budget is considered to be actually only a problem, a hindrance that stands in the free flow of energy and entrepreneurial thinking. So yes, there might be something to it, and there are still areas where this might still be necessary to plan, because otherwise it's just a too complicated business model not to go with a clear budget. Anyways, we'll find different teaching notes or videos to talk about that. Performance managers, thank you for staying with me in this teaching video on flexible budgets and control. The operational performance cycle is made out of budgets and the control of variances. Therefore, the flexible budgeting and variance analysis is an elementary step to identify areas where we have to deep dive into performance issues. Stay tuned for the next series in the new performance management video series. Thanks.